Can vampires be black? Yes, of course, 100% is the short answer to this question, which can be admittedly dissatisfying for people who haven't gotten a logical explanation as to why it is this way. A moral or social explanation just might not be enough. Every so often, I see this idea that vampirism is strictly associated with paper white skin and excludes the possibility of darker skin tones. Recall controversy surrounding Marceline from Adventure Time, who though canonically of black descent appears light-skinned due to her vampirism. This has always rubbed me the wrong way, especially considering this belief is rooted in a surface-level understanding of the vampire genre and misrepresents vampirism as a rulebook rather than a creative choice. As an actual vampire and vampire enthusiast, I couldn't hold back from debunking some myths about vampirism in relation to skin color and culture. All vampires are white. Western vampire iconography is based on European vampire stories, in which the characters were already white to begin with. Vampires and characters in vampire stories have been depicted in media as a variety of racial identities. Aren't vampires white because they can't go in the sun? Vampires are commonly pale. However, just because pale and white overlap doesn't mean they're interchangeable. While you could attribute the paleness to not being exposed to the sun, I would attribute it closer to low blood levels. Consider this characteristic from an artistic perspective. Suppose the intention of the respective author was to give these characters an unnatural look, something out of human convention that distinguishes them as a subject of horror. In vampire stories, the reader is often eased into the presence of the vampire characters. They're often presented as indistinguishable from human beings, albeit a bit strange. It's when a vampire has a bloodlust to satiate, or are low on blood, that they typically become ferocious, more aggressive, or more scary. I'm personally a fan of depictions of vampires in which their paleness correlates with the amount of blood they have in their body. In fact, this is present in Dracula. Another story which applies this idea is the first Castlevania anime. Darker-skinned vampires are portrayed with grayish skin, giving them a deader, more unnatural look. Well, vampires are European. How would there be darker-skinned vampires? Vampire stories are present in a variety of cultures, and as mentioned before, is attributed to European works because they are the main basis for modern vampire works. Consider the Zhongxi of China, undead who suck the chi out of humans. If perhaps, by your vampire rules, they originate from Europe, it still doesn't exclude the possibility of dark-skinned vampires. Dark-skinned people have lived in Europe for centuries. Furthermore, vampirism wouldn't be contained to Europe. One example of vampire media that plays by these rules is the AMC Interview with the Vampire series. There is a large community of vampires situated in Paris. When one of these French vampires turns to vampires in America, Louis and Claudia, they're left to journey back to France to find companionship. Aren't vampires supposed to be an antithesis to Christianity, a predominantly white religion? The Christian Holy Land is in Palestine. Furthermore, crucifixes and holy water aren't their only weakness. Garlic is considered a vampire weakness due to its antibiotic properties and the idea that vampirism is a disease. Vampire weaknesses are intuitive, not derivative from a specific religion. The power of Christ is simply to suggest vampires as something demonic, which can be conversely opposed by religious purity. I imagine a Torah to the head will take out a vampire about as effectively as a Bible will. Says who? Says the author. Vampirism is a genre. The rules of vampirism thus depend on the story itself. This is one of my favorite aspects of the vampire genre, as it has so much room for creative liberty. Every adaptation of the species has its own little twist. To suggest there is a rule about skin color in vampires is frankly extremely limiting, ignoring the various other implications. With this in mind, consider what I've said to be general staples of the genre. I suppose none of it is set in stone, and I suppose if you want, you could make a vampire story of your own, where all vampires are white, and it's impossible for dark-skinned people to be vampires. However, I think you'll find it subject to scrutiny, because ultimately, it's racist. Imposing this belief is ultimately a racist behavior. Many people might not feel that way, but you have to keep in mind history in the horror space. Think of how Haitian voodoo is consistently demonized in the horror genre, but European vampirism, which is intended to be demonic, ultimately became something attractive and novel. It is no coincidence that this association was created. Horror stories have a history of being a channel for perpetuating division. In fact, the image of Dracula is a Romanian stereotype, an attempt at ethnic discrimination in itself. Notice an increase in palatability for the vampire genre with the introduction of the white American vampires Louis Dupoint Dulac and Edward Cullen. People ultimately find comfort in familiarity. Seeing an American in those shoes makes it different, doesn't it? Even if vampires were restricted racially, it's up to us to consider what impact a restriction like that has. It's our duty as creators and consumers to be conscious of what effect our stories have, whether we intended it or not. Our media should not reflect a segregated society. A special thanks to those who disagreed with me, but still watched to the end. I appreciate your time, as well as anyone who took the time to listen. My hope is that this discussion is permanently shelved, but I suppose we'll have to see. By the way, if you love vampires like I do, you might like the comic I've recently started. The link is in the description if you'd like to check it out. Anyways, thank you for your time. Please be kind to each other and go watch some vampire movies.